Hi, in our 8th video looking at spreadsheets, we're going to talk about how we can make decisions in Excel and also do what we call error trapping, both of which involve if statements. So when we make decisions in our normal lives, we're doing it based on a condition, even if we're not necessarily thinking of it explicitly. So for example, if it's raining outside, then I'm going to take an umbrella. If I'm hungry, I'm going to go downstairs and go and get some food. So we're basing our outcomes on some condition, whether the condition is true or false in its most basic sense. And so that's how it works in Excel too. We're using what we call if statements to do this, or if functions. So really an if function works by doing, well, if a condition is true, then do something, right? And that something is obviously something we can specify. So the way this works in Excel is like all our other functions. In fact, maybe I should just talk about that condition, because the condition is important because the condition needs to evaluate to either true or false. We looked at using various arithmetic functions, things like 5 plus 7, which evaluates to the answer, which is 12 in this case. This is not a Boolean value. A Boolean value is either true or false. Instead, we need to use some relational, some comparison operator, say 65 is less than 75, which is true. And so it evaluates to a Boolean value. And our conditions need to evaluate to Boolean values as well. So the way if works in Excel, if I do equal sign to start off every formula, I then type in if, either lowercase, uppercase, and now if I put brackets here, you can see we're prompted to put in 3 arguments. First of all, we have a logical test, and this is our condition, right? So what we are testing for. So what was I doing before? 65 is less than 75. That is our logical test. That's going to evaluate to either true or false. We know it's going to be true in this case. Then our second argument after our comma is the value if this is true. So if it's true, what do we want to be in this cell after it's evaluated? So let's just say we could just put true here. Then our third argument is what is the value if this turns out to be false? Well, let's just put false here just to start off. Then I close off this bracket and press enter, and we get true in this case because what it's done is it's evaluated our condition. It's found this is true, and so it's just put true there. If we swap this, swap this around and press enter, this becomes false because this is now false, and so it's giving us false. Now this is no different to just doing what we were doing before. We don't need if for this, but if I wanted to replace this and say it's true, let's type in it's true and now press enter. Well, we get an error because whenever I have text inside a formula that isn't a Boolean value, I've got to make sure I surround it with quotes to tell Excel that it is text and not just some other reference. So now we get false because it's still false. Let's just go and change this one to it's false as well, like that. Press enter, and now we get it's false as some other outcome. So now it's not just evaluating it, it's replacing it based on our condition. And what we have specified should be the 2 outcomes. So on its own, if statements are what we might call a binary decision, so either being one or the other, true or false, in other words, right? We've only got 2 options here. We can add more options by nesting if statements, as we'll look at a bit later. Okay, to come up with a scenario which we can practice this on, I figured we could just do something like maybe we've got a school sports day and they're doing long jump, right? So the school record might be 6.7 maybe. I don't know how realistic that is, to be honest. And the world record, I did just look this up, is, I believe, unless I've forgotten, 8.95 meters, which is a long way. So maybe 6.7 is actually a bit ambitious, but anyway. So we've got some names here. Let's just randomly create some distances, and to do it within a range, I can use a round function multiplied by, let's say, possibly they could get 10, and then it's going to be between 1 and 10. And now I can add on 1, press enter, and now if I autofill this, we'll get a few options, although it's probably best if I surround this and round it. So if I make sure I surround this with a round function, as we looked at in a few videos ago now, and make sure I add a second argument to say how many decimal places I want, let's just do 2. Press close off like that, press enter, and now let's just redo this quickly. So we've got some distances we can compare. And let's say in our third column we want some comment. Maybe you've got some PE teacher or some student reporter wanting to give a comment to it, maybe comparing it to both the school record and the world record to see how they did. So it's not really a comment, but we could just do something like, well, equals, and then CFA distance is greater than, let's do the world record here, and press enter. and make sure I just drag this. I've got to make sure I lock my world record. I don't want that to move. I want to make sure this is an absolute reference, but adding a $sign after each part of that reference. So if I now autofill this, we'll get Boolean values to see if their value is greater or less than or false. In that case, it's going to do it again, 1 true in this case. But that's not really a comment, so we can use if to make this a little bit better by just shifting this condition, well, shifting this expression into a condition. So if I now just add in if and do my brackets, and now that little comparison is our first argument, that is our logical test. I can now do a comma, and my value of true might be a new world record, like that. And if it's not true, maybe I want to put nothing. I don't want to be too mean. I could just, if I want to put nothing, I can just do an empty bit of text by just putting 2 quotes back to back. And now if I close it off like this and autofill, let's see how they do. We've got 2 world records, amazing. So that's immediately more user-friendly. It's a nicer message than just true or false. And we can also decide not to put anything based on one of our options. But really we only have 2 options here, right? They either are beating the world record and we write new world record, or they haven't beaten it and we write nothing. But in real life, we don't just have these Boolean or binary decisions, we have multiple options. And so to have multiple options in an if statement, we just have to combine if statements really. And this is called nesting. Nesting is where you have a function within another function. So here in my C column, I've got a random function within a round function. So I've nested round within round. Same idea, let's not do that, same idea here with if. So instead, so if we are checking this condition, if their jump is bigger than the world record, we write new world record. But if that's not happened, we can also just replace this with another if function. So if that first condition hasn't been met, we can also supply a second condition. So if I go if, and now do another if function nested within our first if function. So now I might want to check if their school has beaten the school's record, which will still be quite a big achievement. So if I just do C4 again, is this time greater than, what is it, C12? Again, make sure I lock this with my absolute reference, adding a $sign. And now, after this first argument to that second if function, I'm going to do a comma. My value of true this time could be new, just do SR for school record, like that, make sure I have it in quotes. And then I can also just, if I haven't met it at all, just add in a empty string in that case. Now, I'm going to make sure my brackets are, I've got enough brackets here. So we've got our first if function, which should be outside our second if function. So if I add in a second bracket, press enter, and now autofill this to replace it. This time we have 1 school record and 1 world record. So we can see that Faye with 6.81 is not a world record, but it is a school record. So this has worked how we wanted it to. What it's done is it's first of all checked to see if Faye had beaten the world record up here. She hadn't, and so it checked the second condition, and it turned out she had beaten that second, she had met that second condition. Whereas, oh, that's annoying, whereas Alice in this case, 9.28, beat both. But because we have got our first check, which is for the world record before the school record, it means she has, she was told she had the world record and not the school record. We do have to be careful with our nesting, not only because it can get quite messy, especially if you have further options. If you've got, say, 5 options, it's going to become really crazy, and so it's probably best to separate it into different cells, ideally, and have that chain in a little bit more readable in a more readable way. But also because it's checking the first condition first, right? So here it's checking the outer if statement first. So if that condition is met, it's going to not check any other condition which is nested further. So if the world record has been met, it's not going to bother checking against the school record. So in this scenario, we need to make sure our first condition is the larger of the 2 values. Otherwise, it's going to ignore the world record if it's checking the school record first. I can demonstrate this by swapping our 2 conditions by just changing this absolute cell references. And now what's going to happen is, in fact, let's just change this as well. So I'm going to make sure I change new SR to new world record and new world record to new SR. Now, what's going to happen is if we're fortunate to have any of them with what would have been a world record, so Faye again is killing it. She's got 9.43, which is greater than the world record, but it only says she's got a new school record, which is true, because she has beaten 6.7, but really she's also done better. She's beaten for world record. The issue is because this is checking only the first condition. The first condition is true, and so all it's doing is replacing that with new SR and not bothering to check any other conditions because they fall under if that first condition is false. So if the order does matter, you have to be a little bit careful. So for decision making, we use just the basic if function, but if we're wanting to handle errors, we use a similar function called the IFERROR function. Works in a similar sort of way. I can't think of a way to combine it with this. So let's just do a separate scenario here. Why don't we could just do an example where we are dividing two numbers together. So maybe we have A over here, we have B, and we're wanting to do A divided by B. And I could just populate this little table with some fairly random values, including a bit of text maybe, and we could do -7, -8 even, and then B do exactly the same. And then if we want to do A divided by B, let's just make this into a table because it looks fairly bad anyway, but we could make it a little bit nicer. And maybe change the colour up here, make this white. Okay, right, so if I'm wanting to do a little, just you can, loads of scenarios where you'd be dividing. If I just do equals and then do A or divided by B, which is B5 divided by C5 like this, press enter, and now drag this down, well, we're going to have some issues. And so when we have errors in Excel, which we have seen before, either by my mistake or deliberately, we've seen errors which start off with a hashtag symbol or hash symbol, and it's generally giving us a clue, and if I click it, it will usually tell me why. So this is a divide by 0 error. As you probably know from maths, you can't divide by 0. It's not possible to do 5 divided by 0. In a calculator, that will also give an error because it just mathematically doesn't work. And so Excel can't give you anything else other than an error in this case. And in the value errors down here, it's a value error because they're trying to combine both a number and text, which doesn't make any sense. And so again, Excel isn't really left with a choice, it can't deal with this. Now this is obviously bad on its own, but if this is our C column and we're now wanting to do C times 5, well, the error is going to what we would say propagate. Propagation is where it's sort of carrying over, right? So it's spilling through. If we have a chain of different functions, so in this case I want to do the C column, which is really the D column, multiplied by 5. Again, if I drag this down for the first couple, this will be fine because it's working as normal, but our errors are continuing through. So because we have this sort of chain of a function, our error has propagated from the D column into the E column because we had the error in the D column. And so it's said to propagate through. And this is clearly not good because it's going to affect all of our other calculations. Also, if you are building a spreadsheet for a user, having loads of horrible messages like this, it's going to be quite off-putting. Maybe a new user does not know what this means. And so we can avoid this by trapping the error. So the goal is to trap. So trap the error, trapping the error. And as I say, we do this using the IFERROR function. So IFERROR works like all other functions. We have some brackets. Just two arguments in this case. We have first of all our value to check if it's going to give us an error. And then our second argument is something to write our value if that first value turns out to be an error. So for example here, if I do 5 divided by 0, which we've said is we can't do, so it should give us an error. In my second argument, I'm going to instead write divide, if I can spell, by 0. Close this off, press enter, and we get divide by 0 as our value in this cell because what it's done in the first argument is tried to do 5 divided by 0. It can't do that, and so because we have an error, we are going to write divide by 0. So really this is a different version of a normal if statement, except the condition is checking to see if it is an error. So if I fix this and do 5 divided by 1, which is perfectly fine, we get just the answer, which is 5 in that case. So let's just replace our values here. So what we do instead, we just get rid of this and do IFERROR. And in our first argument, we include our normal function or our normal expression. So in this case, it was B5 divided by C5. And now in my second argument, I'm going to write what I want if we have an error. So I could just do maybe, make sure I do it in quotes, NA, not applicable because we have some issue, press enter. And because in this case 0 divided by 7 is fine, that's 0, that works fine. But the other ones where we did have errors are replaced by NA. Now the issue is if I just redo this, that's not going to fix these because they're still trying to, in this case, divide by by text, or multiply by text, which doesn't make sense. So instead we can also just make sure we are trapping the errors here as well. So if error, and I could do second argument, in this case just say NA again. And you'll see what is good about this, it does fix our sum calculations down here. So these were broken before, but now we have replaced those errors, we've trapped the errors. The sum works as normal. Obviously it's not counting the ones which have errors in, but it does work and isn't giving an overall error. So the errors are not propagating anymore, they are trapped and not causing issues down the line. For this try now, either copy this partial table into Excel or go to the description and download the file just to do it if that's quicker, and then try and practice some of the things we've been talking about. So first of all, there'll be a calculation here for revenue which will cause some errors. Make sure those errors are trapped and so don't propagate or don't cause any damage if they propagate. So replace any error with the word error. And then also use an if statement to compare this revenue to the target, and there'll be 4 possible outcomes here, ranging from it being met to being smashed to there being an error. So make sure you use a nested or multiple nested if statements to manage to meet those conditions in part 2. And if you want to see a solution in that downloaded file, there'll be a second sheet which has the solution on it.